This is Scouting Hotlines Radio. Jason Spangler, your host. I'm here with Doug Schwab, who's written a great book about his experience with Spirit of Jamboree, the museum they had set up at the 2019 World Scout Jamboree. And I went through that, talked to him for a long time. My daughter went and experienced it. And so when I bought Doug's book, he reached out to me and asked if I was interested maybe in interviewing him. And definitely as I reboot this podcast, he was one of the people that was on my short list. So thank you for agreeing to come on, Doug.
Thank you, Jason. It's an honor. I've known you for a little while. I respect what you do, and good stuff. Thanks.
Well, Doug, we were talking in the pre-call that you've been doing this for like 58 years, and I know a lot of people in this hobby know who you are, but chances are the people listening to this podcast, there will be some that don't. So I thought maybe just to start off with, if you can tell us a little bit of your scouting background and then also how you got the patch bug, how you got interested in scouting memorabilia.
Sure. So I've always been part of a scouting family. My dad actually went to the 37 National Jamboree. He was too young to go in 35, which was kind of nice that it was rescheduled. And my parents have been involved. My dad, of course, was a scout as a youth. My brother went in. He's about 3 years older than me. He went into Cub Scouts and, raised his hand and said, yeah, my dad will help. So we've been a scouting family for a long time. I went into Cub Scouts in 62 and was, of course, went my way through that, Wolf and Weeplos, and when Wolf was the second highest rank in Cub Scouting. I got my Eagle and have been very involved. I started a troop actually when I was in high school for special needs scouts. When I came back from college, I started that troop up again and still work with that troop today. So I think that back when I was a kid and my dad showed me his 37 National Jamboree patch, and that was obviously something very special. That was even a long time ago. Or it seemed like that back in 65 or 62 when I got started. So I started collecting all the patches, from the activities, and every now and then I would have cousins and we would trade patches, or I would go to a jamboree and I'd take some of my patches or take some from the scout office that were duplicates and trade them with folks. I went to my first National Jamboree in 69 and my first World in 71. I remember the 71 World Jamboree it was a typhoon, so we sat around a lot, kind of waited for the rain to stop. So it was interesting meeting people from other countries. And so I've always kind of had that patch bug and the Jamboree bug. And I collect a lot of different things. I collect both National and World Jamboree. I collect things from my old council, which is now a district and a larger council. I collect Occoquan Lodge 540, our home camp, Camp Potomac. That's where I really focus on things. But, whenever it seems like you always collect a little bit more when you're a big collector. So I've got job patches, jobs and troops. It seems like I've collected a lot of patrol patches over the years. And I also collect rank insignia. Got a lot of that. So I've really enjoyed collecting over the years. It's a nice hobby. My dad was a stamp collector. Kind of nice sitting down when you have the time and just going through these things. And one of the last things I said in my book was, collecting as a hobby should not just collect the patches, but try to collect the stories behind the patches. So that's always kind of been one of my philosophies.
Well, that's actually a good lead-in to going to that 2019 World Scout Jamboree exhibit, because what I saw in that exhibit is definitely what you just described, not just having patches, but telling the story to go with everything. And so just to kind of give people some background, one day I wandered into the museum and was just stunned at how well it was laid out, all the text and pictures and images. And so I had a camera with me, and I literally started snapping pictures of every panel going around the room. And I think kind of towards the end of the room, you and I talked, and that's when you said, oh, well, I've already taken, we took all the glass off the frames, and I'm going to put this into a book later. And I was really excited to hear that. So take us to that exhibit at the 2019 World Scout Jamboree, Doug. Just kind of set the scene for us.
Okay, well, I kind of set up the story by saying Russell Smart had contacted me and asked me to be part of his team, along with Rick Bragga and Sam Fairchild. We really started working on the exhibit starting in early January 2018. I started by seeing this documentation that Russell had started back in November of 2016. He wrote a letter to World Scouting about requesting the World Jamboree. And Russell's a mechanical engineer. If you've ever seen some of his drawings of things, he goes into a lot of detail. So Russell had this vision for this exhibit. I would say that Rick Bragga and Sam Fairchild and I really brought that to life. We basically designed kind of a standardized panel. When I got into it, panels were kind of full of information. And we kind of standardized them so that the panels had basic information about the Jamboree on the top, kind of a story in the middle that said, did you know? And each one of those stories is an individual story about something really cool that happened at the Jamboree. And at the bottom, there's some miscellaneous stories about different things, and it shows some patches and some other memorabilia from it. There's actually 3 panels for each Jamboree. As you know, there were, this was the 24th World Jamboree, and so that made a total of about 72 panels. So each of the panels had this main large information panel, and to the left and to the right of it, there was memorabilia, whether it be neckerchiefs or pamphlets or banners, all kinds of things, some records in some cases it's pictures, things that were sold in the trading post, all kinds of really neat things. So those were the panels. But going into the exhibit, we kind of set it up with pictures of, tried to get as many pictures as we could of activities at each Jamboree, where you'd actually see a picture that was taken at that Jamboree to kind of put you into the feeling of being there. So on one side, we had the pictures in the gateway, and the other side, we had posters from different World Jamborees. So you could see, yes, there's the common theme of the fleur-de-lis, but it really drills down into the theme of each Jamboree that we had posters for there. Everything from maps of the whole Jamboree to, replicas of the patch for that Jamboree or the logo or the theme and things like that. And also at the end of the Jamboree, at the exit, we had something called the Collector's Corner. And the Collector's Corner was kind of the best of the best, the most amazing parts of the Jamborees, the pack from the memorabilia perspective. And we had complete sets of 37s and 47s and things you just don't see together unless you go to a really first-class scouting museum.
Yeah, I have to admit, I did spend some time staring at those, just having recognized that, especially like the 47 Jamboree, there's some of those sub-camp patches that are just absolutely impossible to get and rarely seen. So not that I'm a passionate World Jamboree collector and I was drooling over them, but I could definitely appreciate it. I didn't actually catch one of Sam Fairchild's talks that he gave, but maybe could you tell people a little bit about that role, what Sam sort of did, like a talking piece at the end when you were on your way out?
Yeah, so Sam is a real storyteller. If you've ever asked Sam for a quick bit of information, I'm not sure he knows how to do that. He's a great guy. He's an awesome collector, and he's experienced a lot. He's got an incredible collection of scouting memorabilia, and he is an example of someone who has captured the stories behind all these Jamborees. And basically, he kind of went through a couple things there. In the Collector's Corner, we had a picture of 1924 Jamboree patch that belonged to the King of Denmark. I believe it was patch number 2. Baden-Powell had number 1. The King had number 2. And this, honestly, was the best, well-kept patch that was there. But he told the story of how the King was convinced to have the Jamboree in Denmark, the story of, kind of the history of that patch. And this was a silk patch that was used as a meal ticket and things like that stories that people just didn't really know. Also, he told a story about, and I'm not going to give you the story word for word, but conceptually, it's a story about how youth, like in the 47 Jamboree, it was just after World War II. Typically, contingents would camp together, but at this Jamboree, it was called the Jamboree of Peace, and they wanted scouts from different countries who were at war together to camp side by side, and so that the scouts would get to know one another and know that, it wasn't them who were at war, it was their governments or their parents in some cases. I think that those scouts who attended that 47 and camped next to those people that perhaps they were at war with grew to be different types of people than perhaps if they didn't go to the Jamboree. They were successful in a lot of businesses. They just seemed to have the worldly knowledge that a lot of scout age people didn't have back in the late 40s after World War II. I think it was Sam. Again, we've kind of recapped one of his stories in the book. In the back part of the book, it goes into a lot of the detail, but I think you get the general idea from that.
Well, in touching on Sam, that was one of the great things about the experience for everyone who came into the museum, was just all the docents and how you all were interacting and kind of helping lead us around. Can you kind of talk about how that really added to the experience?
Sure. Between Sam and Rick, Bragga, and Russell, we gathered a docent team of 14 men together, and these are really kind of the top collectors in the world and the people who are the most knowledgeable. Honestly, I was pretty honored to be among a lot of them. We had Albertus Hugvin, who's been collecting for years, Paul Klemer, who has an amazing collection, very detailed, and Paul is one of these guys who has been to a lot of World Jamborees and had done some dumpster diving in his day just to pick up things that, were just not around. Peter Ford runs the museum in UK, the Scouting Museum in the UK. Of course, we had Tony Peck from Australia. He has one of the great collections and very knowledgeable in Australia. ST was there, and he's from the West Coast. Edward Lowe is from Singapore. And Jack McKinney was a friend of Rick Bragga's, and he actually ran the Dr. Pepper Museum in Waco, Texas. So having someone there who was a museum curator to help us kind of put all this together, and of course Bob Hanna, and if Bob's an amazing collector, has so much knowledge about these World Jamborees. It's an amazing group of guys, and we work together well. We got along. David Miura from California, another collector. So it was pretty amazing. And Russell, of course, a lot of what we showed at the Jamboree was from Russell's collection, but I added things, so Sam added things, other people did. But Russell, of course, has an amazing collection of scouting memorabilia as well, World Jamboree.
And so speaking of the items there, when I went through, there were some really unique items, kind of some Baden-Powell items and original pieces. Can you comment on some of those things? I guess all these are pictured in your book, but collectors might want to know about it.
Sure. So basically, kind of as you went through the exhibits, we had the panels, and the panels basically tell the story of each Jamboree. We also had uniforms, and the uniforms that we displayed were either from scouts from host countries or scouts that had a certain story at a specific Jamboree. Like, we had an American uniform from a gentleman that went to the 37 National and the 37 World. We had some Japanese scouts from the 2015 Jamboree. Other things that we had there, we also, which I actually don't picture in my book, just kind of ran out of space and time, was we had the first Jamboree newspaper from all the Jamborees kind of displayed around the globe. That was pretty amazing as well. In the collector's corner, we had things like first national Jamborees from a lot of countries around the world. And this is one of Sam's collections that he's done over the years. Basically, it's the first national Jamboree that was held. And it was interesting to look at the year in which the Jamboree was held, because you get an idea of how old those scouting organizations were by when they had their first World Jamboree. Also in the collector's corner, we had the shields from 1963. I think everyone's seen the bronze and the silver shield, but the gold shield, which was a VIP shield, is very unique. I hadn't actually seen one until I saw this one at the Jamboree. Some very, very rare pieces. The Sea Scout badge from 37, which honestly, as a collector, I've only seen one for sale, and actually I went 50-50 with another collector on it. Some of the 47s are just so rare that you never see them for sale, or it's very rare that you do. The reason that you don't is because someone who's selling patches like yourself would contact someone specifically. We had some really old uniforms, some pictures of troops. We had a skin from a proving contingent at the 67 World Jamboree. We had kimono from 71, which actually I brought home. The kimonos, it's amazing how many different World Jamborees have kimonos from the Japanese scouts, and I've collected a bunch of those over the years. It's kind of fun. But we also had some handbooks from other countries there, and we had one display board that showed scouting in the United Nations. And again, that's rare, very rare. It's not done anymore, but I think it's a collection that Sam Fairchild also had. Other things that was there that was really amazing, Russell had an amazing collection of art that had been done by Baden-Powell. And the way we describe this art is that Baden-Powell traveled. He didn't have a camera. But what he did was a lot of scenes are from his personal travels, whether it's camping with scouts or just being a tourist. And he would take the time and sketch out what he saw and paint it with watercolors. So it was an amazing collection of watercolors that Baden-Powell had, and also some pencil drawings. Yeah, those are really cool. Also, we had a Stetson hat, campaign hat that belonged to Baden-Powell, some beads from the first wood badge, and that Baden-Powell's hat is now on display at the summit in the display center there, the main building. So Russell has moved some of the stuff around and has it displayed in other places. And we also had a portrait of Baden-Powell that the story goes that it was hidden, I believe, in an art gallery in Europe for many, many years, and finally discovered there was about 4 or 5 of them that were found. We had one of them there. It was pretty amazing.
Well, I have to confess, the one thing that really caught my attention, and it was one of the early panels, was something I just knew the story of, but had never seen in person, and that was a sash that an Eagle Scout wore to the 1924 World Jamboree. And of course, those who know the background, this was where James E. West wanted the American Scouts to look sharp, and so each of the Scouts going to that World Jamboree had a sash made for them. And if I'm not mistaken, that's actually the first Eagle Scout patch, was the one that was stitched onto those sashes.
Yeah, it was 1924 at the World Jamboree, and these sashes were hand sewn by James E. West's secretary. So yeah, they're pretty rare too. And yes, that is the first Eagle Scout patch. And apparently the reasoning is at the 1920 World Jamboree, which is 100 years ago this year, the boys who wore their Eagle medals, the first World Jamboree was more like an Olympic competition between these countries. They had the boys running and jumping and doing all these events, and their Eagle medals were flapping and flopping, and James E. West said, we got to do something about this. And I guess he was assuming that they were going to do the same kinds of competitions again. So they came up with the Scout patch, and James E. West, of course, they were all Eagle Scouts that went to some of these early jamborees, and a lot of times they were hand-picked. So they designed that Eagle patch, and obviously it's been very similar since then.
Now that the Spirit of Jamboree Museum is kind of over, let's kind of pull back and talk about your book. I know that I think it's been probably out for a few months now, and you have it for sale. Kind of tell us, about the idea of creating the book, and tell people about the book, those who might be interested in purchasing it from you.
Sure. So the book, I start off the book, in the inside pages with a bunch of contingent patches that take up the whole page. And I love doing things like that, doing these collages. On the back, there's actually a collage of World Jamboree patches. As a collector, I got kind of frustrated. They came up with a poster, and we actually had a picture of it in our exhibit, of World Jamboree patch collage. And a lot of the patches were not real patches. And I think the collectors look at that and know it. But I decided to put this together, a collage of the really great patches. So, for a lot of the jamborees, there was just one patch, but 37 and 47, there were some outstanding patches. The orange and white Sea Scout patch I have included in there, and the Matrice, which is probably one of the most valuable 47s. And I put the King's patch in there, the number 2 patch of the Denmark 24 Jamboree. One of the most unique things that I would guess that no one saw, and unfortunately I didn't write it up anywhere, but in the back of the collage, the 1920 Jamboree patch, if you're a collector, you may or may not know that there wasn't a patch in 1920. But the patch that I have in this collage is actually a patch that Lady Baden-Powell created and hand sewn by Lady Baden-Powell on Baden-Powell's patch blanket. And Peter Ford showed me a picture of it. I kind of photoshopped it into the collage. As it is rare, it's a one-of-a-kind piece, and it's on his patch blanket at the Scout Museum in the UK. Other things that are in the book, I designed the patch for the Spirit of Jamboree exhibit. If you look at a Jamboree patch, the one thing that all Jamboree patches have in common is the fleur-de-lis. So I pulled the fleur-de-lis from like the 47, the 71, because I like that Jamboree, the 67, the 51, the 59, the 57, and the 95, and the 29, and put in these 9 fleur-de-lis, and including the World Scout emblem as one of those 9. And I just thought that was really kind of cool looking. That became the Jamboree patch. Also in the book, I have a picture of the whole docent team and some pictures, live pictures from the exhibit that you can kind of get an idea of how huge this exhibit really was. In the front of the book, I have a panoramic view of looking from left to right in the exhibit. You can see the newspapers there and the big globe that we actually had located on the globe, the number for each World Jamboree in the actual country that it took place. So that was pretty amazing. I have Russell's sketch in the book that he designed on paper, what he wanted the display to look like. You can see that it's in very fine detail. Also, the table of contents shows the 99 years of World Jamboree, the uniforms, the entrance and exit, the Baden-Powell hat and the artwork, the interpreting the meaning of Jamboree at the Collector's Corner, and then pictures from the Collector's Corner, the docent team, a list of Jamborees that has attendance, a page describing how I did my patch design, and then I kind of summed it all up in the end. I did like an author's note in the back and thanked some people and kind of went through it all. But it was really a great pleasure to put something like this. It was a lot of work. I think my wife was really happy when I was finished because I spent a lot of time in my office trying to put all this together. It was a work of joy and a work of frustration at times. Even though we had the idea we were doing the book, I think when it came to taking the pictures, I wish I would have done a better job of taking pictures during the Jamboree. One of the cool things for me that happened, everyone knows Jess Williams, who did the World Jamboree song. We had her kind of written up in our 2019 exhibit. She came in, and there's a picture in the book of her posing beside herself in that frame. And eventually I did, somehow I saw her mom had put in a post in one of the Jamboree Facebook pages, and I sent her a book and told her about her picture being in it and got a nice letter back from her mother. So it was kind of cool. It's great to see the pictures of the docent teams. Again, a bunch of great guys working together, working so hard, putting this all together. One of my favorite parts of the book, beside the collage actually, is on the page 87. It's kind of my the end page. There's a picture of Rick Bragga and I. And even though Rick was in charge, we kind of ran this thing together as a team. There's a wonderful picture of Rick Bragga and I posing in front of the globe. Fresh, we look great. And then there's a picture of us on the last day when we were packing up, and we really looked kind of beat. The Jamboree was a 12-day event. We were there for 21 days, did a lot of work ahead of the Jamboree. It really was a great effort by a great group, and it took us 15 days, I guess, 14 or 15 days to put this thing up and 2 days to tear it down. So it was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime view of World Jamborees, probably one of the greatest collection of Jamboree memorabilia and stories that have been shown in a while. Special thanks to go out to Neil Larson, who has published the World Jamboree memorabilia book. We used it as a reference. Couldn't have done it without looking at some of the pictures of his collection of it in his book. I think that tells it. As I said on the cover of the book, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience at the 2019 World Jamboree. And although there is some wording that I created in this book, a lot of it is really reproduction of what we had there at the Jamboree. Some of the posters I was able to get some better copies than the pictures from the internet and things and position them. But everything that you see in this book was shown at the World Jamboree. It was a lot of fun.
Do you guys have any idea of how many folks walked through the door and got to see the exhibit?
We did. We had almost 15,000 visitors come through our door. We actually counted every day. It's pretty amazing. Obviously, the Jamboree was open to visitors almost every day. Between the visitors, participants, the leaders, and the IST, almost 15,000 visitors.
And you mentioned this was kind of a one-in-a-lifetime deal. I'm thinking back to national jamborees that I've been to. I've never seen anything like this, attempted. I don't know if at other world jamborees there has been. Certainly at the NOACs with Bill Topkins and others who have really beefed that up. The last several NOACs have had really tremendous museum-type setups. So I just think it's so vital to pass on this knowledge and really inspiration to other scouts for the hobby and just for scouting in general. So I'm so thankful that you guys did that, and then I got to experience it with my daughter.
Well, thanks. Like I said, we worked on this for so long, and we tried to kind of standardize the main display elements. I think it really turned out nice. It was wonderful. Again, I can't stress the work of Sam Fairchild and Russell Smart and Rick Bragga and kind of putting all this together. The four of us had never really worked together on a project, and we just kind of all have our specialties of what we do well, and we kind of kicked it into high gear, and it was great. It was just an amazing feat. I know that Rick and I are working on a display for the National Jamboree in 2021. I'd be crazy to think it's going to be as grand as what we did for the World Jamboree, but I think it's going to be a mix of national jamborees, historic national jamboree information, and maybe some other scouting programs that aren't currently active.
Well, Doug, I don't know if we've dropped the hint yet that people can still purchase your book. You want to tell folks where they can find it?
Sure. So the book is $30, and I do ship internationally. It's $5 for domestic shipping. And then just email me, depending upon, there's some countries that it costs a little bit more to send than others. But the book is $30 plus shipping. If you send an email to spiritofjamboree@gmail.com, I'll get that. I'll be happy to connect with you and send you all the information that you need to give me. I've been doing most of the payments through PayPal, and that seems to work almost anywhere in the world. It's a really nice book. I have been signing them off to people by name, and that's been kind of fun. Some of them I know, some I don't. One of the interesting things, and I'll just throw this out as well, one of the most amazing things that happened to me at this Jamboree was because I had some pull in the pictures. I put a picture up there at 1998 Jamboree, picture of me working in the computers. That was the first Jamboree that we had internet for the scouts to use and use it to send mail home. And this gentleman walked up to Rick Bragga and said, "That's me in that picture, and that's Doug Schwab, and we worked together at that Jamboree." And so this guy, Franco, who I'd never met, I hadn't seen since 1998, came into the exhibit, found me, and it was just wonderful to meet someone from a Jamboree that long ago. That's what Jamborees are all about, meeting people and kind of reacquainting with people that you've met at other Jamborees. And the scouting patch collecting hobby is the same way. You go to traderies and you see people that you may see once or twice a year. And it's both a hobby and a lifestyle, I think, of meeting these people and being able to sit down and talk about scouting, talk about scout patch memorabilia. And I recommend the hobby very highly.
Well, I don't think we could wrap up the interview any better than that, Doug. Thanks very much for coming on. And again, I'll put some show notes there and have a link to that email address so that folks can try to snag one of the last copies of your book. So thanks again for coming on, and thanks for all the work you did. Russell, of course, everybody else you've mentioned, Rick Bragga, Sam Fairchild. When I was talking, it was Bob Hanna was the one who first greeted me, and then also talked to Dave in there as well. I knew him. So just a lot of friendly and familiar faces.
And if Bob's listening, I'll apologize again for not putting the H on the end of his name in my book.
I'm sure you've worked
Poor Bob.
All right. Well, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.